Good afternoon, and I'm Tom Masiello. I'm the director of the Adaptive Capabilities Office. And first of all, I just want to start off by saying thank you. Thank you for taking the time to support D60 in this conference over 2.5 days. But also thank you for coming to this session. There's a lot of great options. In fact, I considered skipping out and going to see some other ones. So we really appreciate that you're here, and I'm going to tell you we're going to make it worth your while. Not necessarily what I have to say, but what these four amazing gentlemen up here on stage. And it's really a privilege to be up here with these folks. So, in fact, let me just start off with a conversation I just had before this session started. It was with Dr. Brose there in the back. He mentioned yesterday at the plenary sessions, if it's mentioned once, it was mentioned 100 times, of the speed of getting advanced capability into the warfighter's hands. That's an issue. So today, in this session, that's what we're going to drill down on. And what we're going to use are two DARPA programs as a case study to show how it can be done to accelerate capability into the warfighter's hands. And we're going to use two specific programs, like I said, and these gentlemen are going to highlight those two programs. The first one is Larezo, long-range anti-ship missile. Huge program, tens of millions of dollars. And we have two outstanding folks to talk about that program. First of all, on your right, all the way, is Dr. Artie Mabbett. He is currently at Raytheon Missile Systems. He's the director of advanced high-speed weapons. But from 2010 to 2016, he was in DARPA, initially in TTO. Then the last 2 years of his DARPA time, he was a director of LDO, the Larezo Deployment Office. Next to him is Captain Todd Huber, Chubber. So with a name or a nickname like Chubber, you know he's got to be a naval aviator, and he is. I mean, and Judy's here. We're just talking about how usually Air Force call signs are kind of cool, like Viper and stuff like that. He ends up with Chubber. And then Judy ends up with Judy. But anyway, Chubber has over 3,000 hours. He's flown 50-plus aircraft, 700 carrier traps. But more importantly for today, he's an acquisition professional extraordinaire. He is currently the director of the Larezo Deployment Office. Once we talk about that program and how we worked together with the services to transition that capability into the Navy at a much faster timeline than what would normally happen, then we're going to switch to a much smaller program. It's on the other end of the spectrum of an acquisition program, and that's RAA, Remote Advise and Assist. And RAA is an Android-based communication and situational awareness tool. And to highlight that program, we have two warriors here. First of all is Colonel, U.S. Army retired, Lee Rudisell. Lee has spent 30 years in the Army, leading troops both in the regular Army units as well as special ops and any kind of named operation during his tenure. And we're lucky to have him, very fortunate to have him on DARPA staff now. He is on point for transitioning DARPA technologies to the special ops community. And his partner is Major Eric Rolls. So Eric is currently a company commander with the 3rd Special Forces Group. And really, the best way to describe him, he's just an all-around badass. He has led troops in the 101st Airborne, 75 Ranger Regiment, and now again with the Special Forces Group, Iraq, Afghanistan, and just within weeks, he just got back from Niger, helping in an anti-terrorist fight in Africa. Really looking forward to, again, how we can apply for both the Larezo and RAA, looking at what made those programs successful in accelerating that transition that we can apply in the future. I mean, really, that's what the bottom line is. But let's kind of put it a little bit in context. What is the problem? What is the core problem? Dr. Walker talked about, as well as the other speakers, about our eroding technology superiority. There's no doubt over the last few decades, more than a few decades, we've had significant technology superiority. but that is eroding for many different reasons, to include peer nations spending a lot to catch up, stealing our IP, to what Dr. Walker called just the off-the-shelf nature of advanced technology available to anybody across the entire spectrum. And you know, that kind of goes to the core of our bond between the military and the rest of the civilian population. And kind of we have a trust, kind of a bond, where military will say, please allow your sons and daughters, your mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews, come into the military, and we will do everything in our power to help protect them. That doesn't mean they're not going to go into harm's way, but another way to say it is we're going to trade technology for our most precious treasure, American blood. And that eroding technology superiority really cuts to that heart of that, what I would call almost a sacred bond. So it's very important that we address it. But what is the heart of the issue? I had a 4-star, heard him say, Tom, what has happened to American ingenuity? I mean, we're falling further and further behind. Is it, you know, are we just no longer industrious and entrepreneurial? We actually heard General Perkins yesterday on stage say the pace of innovation needs to accelerate. And that's part of it. But what I would submit, the real issue is the pace of getting technology into the warfighter's hands. We still do great research. We still produce great mind-blowing programs within DARPA, the service labs, and across industry. The real challenge is getting that into the warfighter's hands. You know, we know the F-22. When I went to test pilot school, it was 1989 when I showed up at Edwards. They were flying the YF-22 and the YF-23. It took over 15 years from that point to get the F-22 IOC. It's a great platform. It's an amazing platform, but that just takes too long. Now, I spent 35 years in uniform. I was part of the system for the latter half of my career in acquisition, in test, in science and technology. I think all of us, just by virtue of you being here, all of us have a stake in trying to work within the system and around the system to get that advanced technology, that great stuff, that mind-blowing capability into the warfighter's hands. Because at the end of the day, if it doesn't make it into the field, it's irrelevant for the most part. So let me just talk a little bit about what DARPA is trying to do to help address that problem. And then we'll get into more of a case study to see where we were semi-successful. I mean, we could also argue whether we were even successful or not. Maybe you can even say it just still took too long, and it probably did, but it's at least shorter than the normal process. But first of all, DARPA has a renewed mindset, a renewed emphasis to the program manager that your responsibility includes working the transition of your program into the field. It's not just about managing a great program on schedule, on budget. It's not, hey, we're developing this fantastic widget. Again, it's irrelevant if it doesn't make it out in the field. And that's hard work. It's really hard work. Now, DARPA has tools and other areas that the program manager can turn to help him or her do that. First of all, we have service LNOs, liaison officers from each of the services. They're colonels, 06, Navy captains, to specifically work those relationships, because it's really all about relationships. And at the end of the day, it's the services. Their mission is organize, train, and equip. It's that equip piece where they actually have to put money into the budget to, and that's really where the valley of death occurs. It's all about getting money in the budget and basing our budgeting process, which is an old Cold War relic. You're always 2 years away from getting new money in a program. But you still have to build those relationships, and those L&Os have helped establish that. We also have folks like Lee, who are retired colonels or 06s that are part of DARPA. They've built enduring relationships with their community in the services, as well as have a really deep understanding of the programs, and they also help build those relationships. We have a commercialization office that's run by Casey Gertz for those dual-use technologies that are applicable to go to the commercialization route. And that allows the military to buy back that technology at a cheaper cost because now it's spread across the entire commercial market. The problem is not everything's dual use, and obviously we don't want to have a lot of advanced stuff commercialized because then now it's available to everybody, becomes off the shelf. And the one thing I really want to highlight is the ability of DARPA to reorganize and stand up what we call program offices. Program offices are not the same as tech offices and technology offices. There are 6 enduring offices. Program offices, on the other hand, are by design temporary. The office that I'm the director of, the Adaptive Capabilities Office, ACO, is a program office. Stood up specifically to transition technologies to allow a different type of fight in a contested environment. What we're going to talk about right now is the Larezo Deployment Office, LDO. That is a program office that was stood up initially in DARPA, and Artie was the initial director. Now let's look at Larezo for a minute before I turn it over to Artie and Chubber to talk about it. It started as, I would call, top-down, requirement-driven. You had, at the time, the 4-star admiral in the Pacific, Admiral Willard, put out an urgent operational need for a new missile, a new anti-ship missile. He had interactions with Tony Tether, the DARPA director at the time, and Tony Tether decided, I will take this on. I will help developing enabling technologies to address your urgent operational need. So starting off the bat, you had high-level support to achieve this. It included working closely with the services. In my program, my ACO, I have a DARPA program manager and 4 deputy program managers, 1 from each of the services. They have office space within DARPA. They're access to the networks, as well as have access to all the classified networks. It's really, really important. As LDO stood up, same sort of thing. You had a DARPA program manager and a deputy program manager from the services. It was close cooperation from the very start. So Artie, why don't I turn it over to you now to kind of go in a little bit more details, and again, looking to really tease out the lessons learned that we can apply to future programs.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Thanks for the time. So a little bit of history of the program itself. So as Tom had said, we started the program off based on urgent operational need from Admiral Willard in 2008. As we discussed, things can take too long. It is unfortunate that it took us 2008 to really get started in about 2010 with the program in earnest at that point. But from about 2010 to 2013, the program was heavily focused on really doing the tech demonstration that we had just mentioned. Time frame when we started looking at other opportunities that were out there to field capabilities to meet this urgent need, it was determined that Larezo was probably the fastest to get out there if we focused this activity. So at that point in time, we actually diverted the program from really a tech demonstrator into an honest-to-goodness goal of delivering an operational capability. So one of the things I think we did real early on in the DARPA program, which is unlike some of the other programs we have, is from the core start of the program, we really had to focus on getting it out into the field. So we started doing much more robust analysis, more operational understanding, more ConOps work, things of that nature. But the interesting part through this program was, the fact that we did have very close ties with the services. Actually, Captain Corderer, sitting a couple rows back there, he was the first deputy for the Larezo Deployment Office. So Q came on board to the program right about 2013, prior to the LDO. And that was a big push on the program side to get that early involvement from the acquisition community and the warfighter community to really help shape the program. So in 2013, when we had our first flight, we really had the system aligned to working with the services already and how we were going to transition this opportunity. And then a little bit of history of how this actually did transition. So in 2013, we had our first flight in, it was like July, I believe, and then our second flight in October. During that time frame, after that second flight, the Navy came back and said, okay, we're all in, let's go fast. So between Q and myself and working with the Navy, we came back with more of a, I guess, a traditional acquisition approach, which was looking at a 9, 10, 11-year time frame. Absolutely not what the warfighters were needing at the time. So Secretary Kendall at the time, who was the ASD or ATNL at the time, really pushed us and said, go back and think about how would you do it differently if we took off all the handcuffs? What would you do to speed this program up? And so between the two teams, the Navy and the DARPA team, and then we actually pulled in some of the Air Force folks as well, we went back and we looked at a couple case studies. In particular, we went and we met with the MRAP program manager, pulled out all that documentation. We met with Global Hawk and Dark Star program leadership, as well as pulled Kelly Johnson's Skunk Works model. We went through that whole series of documentation and really picked out the key things that we wanted to have as core tenets of the program office. And we pulled this construct together with a focused, empowered team. The LDO was proposed as a way to stand up this organization in a different cultural environment. One of the key aspects there was we did not want this to sit in a traditional acquisition house. So part of the DARPA agreement was to have a core team stood up at DARPA to really utilize that mindset but apply it to the acquisition process. So it was a really innovative approach of pulling all these different aspects together, and I think we'll talk about some of the key tenets later. But that's a little bit of a history how LDO got started and really how we ramped up that program. And ultimately, the whole concept was to ensure that we had consistent leadership, that were the right people, that were willing to push the risk management approach, push hard systems engineering, really take a hands-on approach to managing this high-risk, high-payoff program. And really, the way we transitioned this over the years was having leadership come up through the ranks as deputies and chief engineers that ultimately fleeted up. And that's where we can probably transition it to Chubber here, as he is fleeted up now to the full director position.
I appreciate that. So I did, I want to start off first, if I can, and just say I'm really privileged and humbled to be here. DARPA is a really inspiring place, and it's an inspiring place because of inspiring people. And I'm excited at the opportunity to take part in this discussion about something that's near and dear to my heart. If you're in this room, then I'd like to think that you're in this room because you want to get in the fight. The fight is real. This is happening now. The future is really uncertain. I don't know how it's going to pan out, but I want my kid to grow up in a country or in a world that's driven by free and democratic people. And it may not turn out that way. And the outcome, I think, is controlled mostly by us, if not exclusively by us. And so we need the will to fight and compete. So again, I see a lot of friendly faces in this room. I see Sleestack and Judy, you guys are definitely in the fight. Q, you've been in the fight for a long time. So again, there's a lot of friendly faces in the room that are involved in this. I think it's important to give context to what this program's about. So the LRASM, the Long Range Anti-Ship Missile Program, is a tactically dominant surface warfare capability. We provide sanctuary employment against capital warships in a contested environment. We dominate in the surface warfare realm. So as one of many examples or vignettes of where that's relevant, the South China Sea, again, just given one example of potential areas of focus. The South China Sea is the most valuable piece of real estate in the history of the world. So, I mean, trillions of dollars move through there. I'm involved in a number of nonprofits. I know deeply about the impact to people around the world when you have global economic shocks. So if a 13-year-old with an AK-47 in a little boat off the coast of Somalia can change the price of oil and price of goods transiting through piracy stuff, what could China do if they close off the South China Sea? So this is dramatic stuff we're talking about, and if that fight happens today, it will be extremely challenging for the United States Navy or the United States as a nation to enforce the freedom of navigation through the South China Sea. That changes in 3 weeks. So this weapon system will field on time, and just to highlight kind of the culture that we have, in that time frame, we're going to do 2 more test shots, but we're still fielding in 3 weeks. So this is a very different culture. It's a very different program. I think it's important to talk through 2 contexts. One is the capability. I won't talk in detail about that very much, but certainly long range is in the name, so you know that it's a long range capability is a key performance attribute. And you're not going to go in a contested environment without leveraging a significant part of autonomy. So both of those really are complete and total game-changing in terms of the capability. It will take time for us to understand and appreciate how dramatic the impact is of this weapon system on the way we fight as a nation. I think the other one that may be even more relevant to this forum is that it is a very different mindset in terms of pace of acquisition. So we are officially an ACAT 1C major defense acquisition program. We're between $1.5 billion and $2 billion. But at instantiation, if you look at the tactical maturity of the program, the manufacturing readiness of the program, the current status quo was an 8 to 12 year program. We're going to do it in 4. Again, as I said, we're going to field on time. We're going to be hundreds of millions of dollars below the CAPE estimate. So Secretary Stackley did not fund the program to the CAPE estimate. He funded it to the Joint Service Cost Estimate because he believed that we could get it done on time and within that amount of money, and we have. So I'm extremely, extremely, as you can tell, seething with pride about the team because I know the sacrifices have gone in to make that happen. So it's not about trying harder, though. So try harder is not a good success strategy. You got to work differently. And for us, I think you can add it all up. We'll talk about some details a little bit later on, but you can add it all up into a culture. And culture is a lagging indicator of behavior. That's all it is. So it's just your behaviors now are going to, over time, foster into a culture. And our history comes from DARPA. So I think if you're involved with DARPA, folks here have some affiliation with DARPA. You should feel justifiably proud about Larezo and other programs because it's that culture that really has, or the behaviors that were done at DARPA have really affected the culture of our program, and we work very hard to preserve that. If you go to the, this Poised for Success slide, just to give a little bit more on the program, we are going to field with the B1 by the end of the month. It's a Navy-led program now, but we're not officially a joint like a capital J program. I have contracting officers and contract vehicles with all services and multiple agencies. We're now the effects deployment office, so we manage and think about fielding effects, satisfying commander's intent at volume and pace. So we also manage the MALD-N program, the AWARE radio program, and a number of other classified programs. But again, we're looking at it from an effects chain perspective, and anything that's pace relevant, we want to get a hold of that so that we can drive to delivering for the warfighter. So if there's a consistent theme when you meet people who are affiliated with the Effects Deployment Office, it's that they make other people angry because they're constantly complaining and constantly fighting and constantly, sorry for my language, but bitching about what it's going to take to get this done. And our focus, though, I'll say when we talk about managing concurrency, that was a big thing. I'll get to risk management in a little bit. I want to say we have shattered, I think, the paradigm, the idea of, I wrote it down, avoidance of all versions of concurrency at all costs is a status quo. We really have shattered that paradigm. So the Effects Deployment Office, if you're pitching a program to us, or we're involved in a program, and you put up a schedule that I'm anywhere near the room, I'm going to tell you right now that we should be on contract for test assets by the day after CDR. So as soon as if you have a design, you can build a proposal around that design, and I expect once we confirm that that is the design, the next day we need to be awarding a contract. I'd prefer us to have subsystems through qual before we award a production contract, but it's not required. We did that on this program. We're going to do it in other programs. All that long lead for those high-tech stuff, while you're all just sitting around waiting for it and nothing else of value is happening, is just a god-awful waste of time. So again, there's not actually, as you pull apart risk in concurrency, most of it is fictitious. A lot of it, there is some that's real, but it does take a very deliberate effort and a lot of work to understand the actual risks, the actual things that could happen, and then very deliberately at a detailed level manage those particular risks. So if you just let it fly on its own, then I'm a fervent believer that you're going to get what you put into it, and it's just going to kind of run awry, and folks will default back to a norm. Go to the next slide. Yeah, I think just to help plant some seeds for folks, we are asked quite frequently about some of the secrets to success. One of the things that Artie and I talked about earlier today, it's one of our shared great fears for the program, is that folks are going to come in and try to copy paste some of what was done for Larezo without understanding the underlying principles. So a great example of that has been the leadership access, and kind of a perfect vignette. So we have the equivalent of a gate review every month. So we have the executive steering board. I'm briefing the SAE face-to-face with a whole bunch of other folks, OpNav, Air Force equivalent. Excuse me. We have MAGCOMs that are dialed in. The theater commanders are sometimes dialed in now as well. DOT&E, CADF, Aflatech, those guys all have representatives there. Special programs folks have representatives there. Every single month, face-to-face. And there are other organizations that are now saying, I need to get to an ESB because Larezo did an ESB. And a great example of missing the point of an ESB is when you ask, what's that for? Well, it's basically so I can get out of doing stuff by just going to the leadership. Or I can get people in trouble who are being toads in the road. The ESB, I talk a lot at ESBs, but ESB is not a place to talk, it's a place to listen. And it's about this human level connection to align your activity with intent. So there's our fundamental approach to work on Larezo is at the human level and at a very detailed level. So if you look at, if any of your programs are managing tasks, you're trying to align tasks through email, you're going to have problems. Right? Email is causal. I think, so I've been talking to some academics about trying to do, it'd be a great research project for somebody to track volume of email versus a program performance. I guarantee that there's a direct causal relationship there. And there's lots of research to indicate that. Don Kiefer up at MIT spent a lot of time on that with Nelson Repenning. And so we've taken that very literally and to heart. So I spent a lot of time on travel to have face-to-face meetings. We do VTC. We've invested a lot of money in having that face-to-face interaction or picking up the phone. Ran experiments. We actually, instead of, hey, you're going to send an email to 20 people, and then we're going to see how long it takes if you just called 20 individual phone calls. We actually save time. There's so much confusion in sending an email to 20 people, and the subsequent emails that you have to send to eventually clear up the confusion, or you don't know that it was confused, and then you've got to solve that problem later on and have multiple meetings with multiple people versus, and you'll know because when you call, you're going to hear somebody ask a question that they wouldn't have on an email. So anyway, I'll get off that soapbox, but say, this human level interaction, when we go to ESBs, I can make, and Artie could make, these ridiculously bold decisions that a program manager has absolutely no business making or the authority to be able to make, but with 100% complete certainty that it's aligned with what the leadership wants. So eventually, as folks work it up to the leadership, you know what the answer is going to be. So you can make that decision very early. So in any case, that's an important part of how we've approached this. I'll say, just to kind of close out from my end and turn it over to Artie or General Masiello, over to you. As we look forward to what's next, we could have done this faster. I think that's important. I think if we took the exact same group of people and we started over again, we probably could have taken even some more time out of it. We do have some challenges, contracting, budgeting. There are still some challenges in those communities. They're not incentivized to go particularly fast. We've been blessed by having multiple contracting officers with their own separate authorities. So if we've got challenge one and others can move faster, then we're able to do that. Some of the things that the Secretary of Defense has highlighted about leveraging each other's contract vehicles, we've already been doing that. So we've got aspects of Larezo burning on all services. But our focus now moving forward is not just to field this capability that's an impressive one for now, but to keep it alive. And I can't get into the details, but I will say very specifically, on multiple times now, we've challenged our team to say, I want to field capability, not in a year, certainly not in a FIDIP or in a budgeting cycle, but certainly not in a year, and not in months. I want to get down to weeks. We need to be able to get to days. So the conversation that was yesterday, I wrote it down on the pace needs to be at campaign speed. We need to be able to evolve capability. So, Larezo, our team has done test events, taken the early accelerated learning, modified the firmware, run full end-to-end testing, validated all of it, got all the safety approvals to then go do test shots, and done a test shot in less than a month. So, and we've done that now multiple times. So the ability to do that to support the warfighter in real time is a known fact if everybody else gets out of the way. So, and again, these are really well-intentioned people with their own requirements to follow those. But I think as we look ahead, that will be the conversation. It is the mindset in the effects deployment office about making sure that we don't just field capability now, but that we field a key attribute of that capability be hyper adaptability. So that, I know there's another phrase that was said yesterday talking about fielding uncompromised capability. So I know for a fact that Russia, China, whoever has the best intel community has absolutely no idea what Larezo is going to be able to do in a year, because I don't know what's going to be able to do in a year. And I know that it's going to change and adapt as the warfighter decides what it wants it to do. We have set up an architecture that allows us to be able to do that. Now again, do we have the right contracts in place? Do we have, how do we address operational test requirements? How do we make sure that we have the right funding? All of those are really key questions that we're now focused on, but the ability to do that is now instantiated. So fully reprogrammable in the field, those type of capabilities are things that if any of you are working on other programs, I think it should be a very deliberate decision. I would strongly encourage folks to have like actual meetings where you actually sit around the room and say, are we adaptable? And what are our limits on adaptation for our system? And are there other things we should be doing to fix that? Anyway, thank you.
Sure. Artie, you have anything to add real quick? I know you'll have opportunity to talk during the Q&A.
We'll do the questions. Yeah, okay. I think that's going to be the interesting
so let's transition to RAA, again, Remote Advise and Assist. And this program, it's on the other side of the acquisition spectrum. It's small. It's under the radar. You didn't have a 4-star admiral and the director of DARPA personally committing to solving this problem. This started bottoms up. This started with an interaction between DARPA going into theater, and Lee was part of that delegation, talking to folks in the fight. Specifically, this is our support to Iraqi security forces in their fight against ISIL, mainly in Mosul. And Eric was part of that discussion as well. So Lee, why don't I turn it over to you, and we can now drill down on Remote Advise and Assist.
Absolutely. And Larezo is a great example of receiving a requirement and really the champion beginning at that 3- and 4-star level with what I'll call a capital T-like technologies, big T in those technologies. And what Eric and I will share with you is a case study about how we began at the operator level and actually grew that support, and the champions were at the ground and moved north, if you will, into the chain of command. And it's a series of what I'll call lowercase t technologies that, when compiled together, made a very effective capability on the battlefield. Now, when I arrived at DARPA as the Army Service Liaison in 2014, I did not have a full understanding of how we operated behind the scenes and the years of research and development that went into building the capabilities we used on a modern battlefield. I was a consumer of those capabilities as an operator, but I didn't understand the other side of the fence. And so here, 4 years later, I have a humble appreciation for what we do here at DARPA. and I see the magic of having the right idea, meet up with the right team, receive the right resources, and then have that be the right timing to be able to get a capability into the field. And it's truly a source of pride that I take with my fellow DARPA mates and seeing those things transition into a military capability for our military. Now, there are multiple factors that go into a successful transition. I believe at its most basic level, every transition requires teamwork, communication, persistence, definitely, and then there is an element of timing. And I think all of those elements were present when remote advise and assist became a military capability that was utilized by the US and coalition forces to defeat the Iraqi in Iraq against the Islamic State of Iraq and in the Levant, ISIL. DARPA's Persistent Close Air Support Program began in 2011, or PCAS program, with the intent of fundamentally changing how we deliver fires, precision fires in the battlefield. Specific goals of PCAS included the development of a flexible architecture with a workflow that allowed us to seamlessly transfer data across multiple communication systems, architectures, into the end user's hands. And then rather than focus on a specific algorithm or a particular wavelength, we focus on the outputs. What would the end users need and how would they best get that information? We also digitized what had been up to that time an analog process, the call for fires, which in the end significantly increased the volume and reliability of data transfer across the battlefield. A second goal of PCAS was to leverage the cheap and readily available commercial technology out on the market. It directly adapted the use of commercial tablets, phones, and user devices, and software applications. A lot of benefits to that, and that you drive down the overall cost. You can refresh your tech rate at a much higher rate than what you would normally might enjoy with a very standalone monolithic system. And then also you make it readily available to those who are going to handle these types of technologies, that they use them every day, and so it's intuitive for them to use those interfaces. And so there was a lot of benefits to that. As a government partner on the PCAS program, the Air Force Research Lab Rome was extremely successful in integrating those types of commercially available technologies into the Android Tactical Assault Kit, or ATAC system. Rome delivered an Android-based system that enabled our folks on the ground and combat air crews to seamlessly transmit data to each other, share that data, and by doing so, sharing situational awareness. And that included positional data. It included positional data of the aircraft, the weapons that were on board those aircraft, what they could do, the approach routes that the aircraft could take. And PCAS went as far as being able to say that the ground force element could actually authorize the release of weapons. Not all that has transitioned into the force, as you may imagine, because it was a little bit confrontational, or it was at least disruptive to how we've done things in the past. Now, by 2015, the PCAS program invested 4 years in this type of technology, where we had some aircraft add-on capabilities and some ground agent tool sets where they could share real-time information and get after the effective, safe, and efficient delivery of those munitions. And the concepts and the technologies developed under PCAS would eventually become the military capabilities we deployed under the Remote Advise and Assist Initiative. In 2014, these things were on the minds of our senior leaders as the situation in Iraq changed. In June of that year, ISIL had launched an initiative against the Iraqi security forces, and in fact seized control of a large territory in both the north and the west of the country. It was under these conditions that U.S. forces returned to the country, where we'd largely been absent since 2011 upon the withdrawal of forces. And when we returned, we had U.S. soft forces in the lead. So our special operation forces were at the tip of that spear as we entered back in the country. And when they arrived, they faced a very difficult situation. While they were tasked to advise and assist their Iraqi counterparts, they were not authorized by U.S. national policy to accompany them forward on those combat missions. And so our soft guys do what all soft guys do. They improvised and they overcame. They used what they had at the time, and they were familiar with ATAC. And they had access to commercial off-the-shelf and government off-the-shelf capabilities. They were familiar with and could utilize the ad hoc cellular network that was available in the country, and they had their own beyond line-of-sight communications capabilities. With this, they compiled some sort of technologies they provided to the Iraqis so that they could virtually accompany them on operations, and were able to have situational awareness of what was happening on the ground, so they could complete their task, which was to assist them in mission accomplishment. At the time, it was not an ideal solution. There was additional investments that needed to be made since this was an ad hoc capability put together. Additional time, effort, funding, all were things that needed to be made and invested to optimize the system. So this set the stage for DARPA to begin to collaborate with folks on the ground and in the rear who could provide additional support to our mission folks that were forward. Now, transitioning from technology to military capability is remarkably easier when you have people championing the efforts. And RA was fortunate to have champions on the ground all the way from Iraq, all the way back to the senior levels of OSD. Once we identified a need to make some changes to the security protocols we had in place so that we could share information among, I'll call them green forces, which were the Iraqis, and the US forces, our blue forces, then we set to work, and that was by the DARPA PM at the time was Dr. Dan Patt. Now, he teamed up with the Naval Postgraduate School, where Eric, who had been in country and was one of those first individuals I mentioned on the ground, had now come out of country and was going to school. So he teamed with the Naval Postgraduate School, and the champion there was none other than Major Eric Rolls next to me. Dan Patt also championed or received operational support from the Special Operations Command Central in Tampa. And the advocate, the largest advocate and champion there was Mr. Pat Traeger, who worked out of the J3 S&T cell there. Now, funding for additional work was allocated by DARPA to modify the architecture to make sure we fit what was going on the ground. And so you needed Iraqis to be able to share information with their own headquarters, with their adjacent units, where they had not been able to do that before. And you needed that to be ingested into the US battle command systems back in the rear so that we could adequately provide support in form of precision fires or intel, or just generally to assist with maneuver operations and coordination. At the same time these efforts were underway, a CENTCOM Tiger team under the direction of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, Mr. Frank Kendall, stood up here in the DC area. And we participated in that. And one of the first actions of the CENTCOM Tiger team was to put a call out for technologies across all agencies, research labs, and research centers. And DARPA responded to that call with a recommendation of several programs. And we're very fortunate that a couple were picked up, including the Remote Advise and Assist. And we received OSD endorsement for further maturity and the deployment of those systems forward as soon as we could make that happen. DARPA deployed a single RA system initially. And it was immediately put into use by the forward forces. And we immediately, as good soft operators do, began to receive feedback on how that system wasn't optimal for them. And so we made further adjustments before we deployed 3 subsequent systems in the next 6 to 8 months. Those, again, were put into immediate use by US and this time also Australian soft forces as they linked up and supported their partner. Meanwhile, in March of 2016, myself, accompanied by Mr. Dale Waters from DARPA, deployed in the theater to talk to the senior Coalition Joint Task Force leaders. We talked to folks at different echelons to include the people who install, operate, and maintain the battle command systems for our own US forces forward. In each conversation we had, there was a positive response on any type of technology that would add to forming a common operational picture amongst all folks operating in the area. And in fact, they went on to further highlight, hey, I'd like for those technologies to be at a favorable price point. I'd like for those things to be intuitive so that the Iraqis have little training as necessary for them to use them in combat. And oh, by the way, I'd like for those things to be as cheap as possible so I can get as much into their hands as we can make. So those all, if you were paying attention earlier, those all fit what we were trying to do with PCAS and had now formed into what we'll call the remote advise and assist portion of that program. Now, success of early RA systems led to a request from theater for additional capabilities, improved capabilities, and additional systems. That request made it all the way up through the different change of command, got back to the United States for action for CENTCOM and SOCOM. And on the SOCOM side, the Special Operations Command side, they staffed it, and it eventually was presented as an option for their SOCOM Requirements Board, where the Vice Operations sits on that board. RA was approved for one, receiving an initial investment so we could procure additional systems and move forward. But even more importantly, the staff was tasked to go back and officially document this requirement so they could begin the process of making it a program of record. Now today, RA is deployed and supporting the warfighter on 2 continents and in multiple countries. And the last time I heard, there was about 100 systems or so deployed at this time. And in my humble opinion, RA was the right idea. It was supported by a wonderful team. It received modest but necessary and appropriate resources. And its timing on the battlefield was impeccable because it provided a difference in the success of our partners and the stabilization of that country. Now, although PCAS was not originally designed for this particular use, I think it highlights that not every DARPA program transitions into a military capability that we originally thought it would or intended it would. And so I think that's a great point to take away. So those are kind of high notes on RA. And all these points that I've made today, when I referred to soft on the ground and heroes doing the right things, I was really talking about the man to my right, Major Eric Rolls. And I think it's appropriate for him to talk about what was happening on the ground.
Hey, thanks, sir. Hey, I just want to echo the comment. It's really humbling, and I appreciate everybody here and what you guys have done in the community that you're part of. I'm probably the most junior member of this research and development community, in this entire building. And I have a great appreciation for everybody here and what they're doing, and I appreciate being part of this team. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit about is really just how I got to be part of that team, and close some of the gaps between pie in the sky research and development and killing bad guys on the ground, because that's what we all want to get to. Like, I know everybody in here wants to do the same thing as well. And we're all on the same team to do that. And the other piece is everybody here is exceptionally motivated, and it's very inspirational to be around you guys. And we really got to reach out and just grab all the people that stayed at home and didn't come to the D60 conference or whatever other thing we're going to, and drag them along, because everybody sitting here is probably an early adapter. Unless there's a few clandestine agents in here trying to figure out how to sabotage things. But it's not, we're not the challenge in the community, right? This community doesn't have a technology problem or technology challenge. It has a personality and a people challenge, really. Like, how do we connect the right people to make things happen? And that was really my role in this, is be a connector, and just kind of carry things through. In the Army, we call it be the action officer. So, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate everything you guys have done. And thanks for the mentorship from all those in the room who have really taken me under the wing to educate me on the rest of the processes. As Lee was saying, we're consumers. We just get stuff. We don't know where it comes from, and then we complain, and we ask for better stuff, And now I'm actually at the person who's like, okay, I got your complaints, I'll pay for it and fix it. Now I want to shorten the time gap to, to get it out in the field. So I also want to clarify, RAAs really wasn't about winning or losing. It was about doing things better and being more effective. So we just probably still won, against ISIL, and the Iraqis would have won. It's also being used extensively in Syria and Africa. But it's really not about winning. Like I said, it's just about killing more bad guys in process, preserving more friendly lives, and killing less civilians, because all those things happen in war. Some you want to do more of, some you want to do less of. And that's what this program, at a really small cost, was able to do, is just be more effective. So I want to talk about speed real quick, right? When we think about speed and time segments, if I ask people in this room, like, what's fast to you? What time segment do you think in? You know, if you're an acquisition guy, you're probably going to say palm cycles or quarters or something like that. You know, and then if you get down to some of the people that are actually developers and stuff, they're talking much shorter scrum cycles or whatever you call it. And then weeks, and then, you know, some of the gentlemen talking about getting things down to days. That's absolutely incredible and astounding, and glad to hear we're doing that. But when you get down to the bleeding edge, or whatever you want to call it, tactical edge, you're really thinking in like literally seconds and tenths of seconds. So that if you ask somebody in the tactical edge for a number, and they're a gunfighter, they're probably going to tell you like 0.10, because that's about your, you know, the low threshold when you're trying to split hairs and get things done. You're thinking in tenths of seconds. So when somebody tells me it's going to take 6 months and that's rapid, I'm like, that is not rapid at all. Like, that is, I'll be home drinking beer, and in 6 months, you know, there's a lot we could have done that we're not going to have the opportunity to do. So, you know, we have to move at the speed of war, and what that requires is a constant parallel efforts from top to bottom in every funding pot you can use, with every different, you got to touch everybody you can. And I learned to do that, you know, as part of this community, and just harness a lot of different resources and make them all move forward at once. So when I landed on the ground in 2014, I was a troop commander for the first group of about 50 guys. We were first American forces to go back in Iraq under Title 10 authority, June 19, 2014. Couldn't go with our partners, as Lee was explaining. So we were policy constrained. So we had to actually develop, you know, one of the interesting things we say is we develop we weren't overmatching the adversary's capability, we were overmatching our policy restrictions, which again is why I say it wasn't winning versus losing. And finding ways to be effective despite, you know, despite some of our restrictions. And that's a divergence from some traditional, you know, overmatch that we have to use technology to do. But that's what we did. So we weren't allowed to go out with them. You know, these guys are coming back bloodied every mission. We don't really have a way to provide direct support to them while they're out there. So we just innovated, used a bunch of duct tape and cell phones, and broke all the rules. So if you're like an S6 person in here, sorry, not sorry. You know, we really didn't care about, you know, network issues or vulnerabilities, because there was no near-peer threat that was trying to stop us from doing something. So we really just did whatever we could to get technology into the hands of our partners. And for Army Special Operations, and particularly Special Forces, that's what our focus is how do we help our partner pursue mutual objectives? And a lot of the stuff coming out of these buildings is U.S. only. Right, so we were really trying to take what had developed as a U.S. unilateral capability and just spread it out. And that was a novel idea. I don't know how, but it shouldn't be, right, in our acquisition community, but it was. And that was one of the biggest challenges we had, was just convincing people that, you know, that we needed to do that. So we had a lot of things going for us. We had the right people on the ground who were prepared to innovate and do things and assume risk. We had the impetus to do it. I mean, that's another thing you have to do successful transitions. You got to have a requirement, or you got to have a bad guy to kill. You got to have something to go after. And that's, you know, for us, that was easy. And after we did some of the initial pushes, I just labeled it Mosul. Like, we got to get this done before Mosul, and it's going to kick off in the fall of 2016. So we put that benchmark on the wall. We were running all these parallel efforts, so we were deploying more equipment to Iraq between the fall of 2014 all throughout 2015, using all these different little pots of money. We tried to get everybody involved, from DARPA and CTTSO down to recharacterizing other money we could find, building kit, getting it forward, cold calling companies and just asking them for equipment, which, you know, if any of your industry in the room, you might have given us stuff that I just said, hey, if you give it to us, we'll go kill bad guys with it. How can you say no to that, you know? So, and it works. And a lot of people coughed up a lot of equipment, and it was very effective and saved a lot of lives and killed a lot of bad guys. So we ran all that while we were kind of working the semi-official side, which was relatively unstructured because it wasn't a traditional program. And then probably February of 2016, money was in the bank from DARPA. And by October, we were delivering that equipment that you see up there. And those are mostly pictures, real pictures from downrange. So in a really short period, we were able to take what was a, highly developed product that had a lot of prototypes come before it and really just get it back out there and make these guys more effective. The early kits were so, just cobbled together and vulnerable to cyber attack and stuff. They were never actually attacked, but they were vulnerable. We used to call them the Hillary Clinton kits. I'm not, I don't have to answer to DARPA for anything I say here, so I'm surprised that they let me talk.
I might have to, but that's okay.
But
If your mic goes cold, you'll understand why.
right, yeah. But it was fitting, and that was the reality of it, and we just kind of kept updating things and hardening things and came up with a solution that actually got through all these crazy, restrictions that we've implied upon ourselves. And, like the way I looked at it, and I think, the Larezo guys, I can see they did the same thing, is just, hey, if you're telling me you can't do something and it's because of our own policy, we'll just change the policy or accept it or whatever. It's different if it's law. So the only thing that I don't have to, the only thing that I can't change is just the law. But, we didn't have a really traditional approach to it. It was very effective. We closed the gap between operators on the ground and all the developers and whatnot. And we got to keep doing that. That's the bottom line, and that's what I took away from it. That's why I'm here now. And that's why I'm going to continue to thread people from where I am back into these communities and just try to close the gaps as much as possible. So thank you, everybody here. Thanks for what you're doing. Appreciate you.
Okay, so we're at the question and answer, and we got some great questions, so thank you very much. But Eric, I'm dying to know, and I'm sure folks out in the field, just tell us a little bit about Africa. Can you just take about a minute and tell us how the operation in Africa and the use of RAA in that theater?
Right. So when I arrived in Africa, so I knew I was going to Africa long before I got there, and I started pushing requirements to Africa. To my guys there to push up and start getting money allocated against this. And then did the same thing we did in Iraq, started calling all the industry guys and asking for free stuff, and they gave it to us. So showed up with some equipment in January of this year. The guys had already, you don't really have to have anything to run this concept. You can just use, we do have funding at the point of contact. So at the ground level, we have some fungible funding. We just go out and buy some stuff, break all the network rules, don't tell anybody we're doing it, and then just do what we need to do. So we did a little bit of that there, and then by the time I arrived, we had about $11 million from SOCOM and 51 kits that are spread all across North Africa, from Somalia all the way to Niger, which is it's about like 3 or 4 times the size of the United States. And we've been able to deploy that with partners there. And I didn't really know that much about Africa. It's the first time I'd ever been there. But the partner forces are very proficient there. They're surprisingly to me, but they were able to really pick a lot of this stuff up and use it and do things that we really never before could have done with them. So very successfully deployed there. We also had it deployed in PACOM at the low level when the what was the name of the small city that the ISL guys had taken over? Marawi. When the ISL guys took over Marawi, we were remotely advising the all the Filipinos down there that were basically helping take it back. So really didn't hit the news at all, but very, very good effort. I mean, that's ideal, right? And the same thing in Africa. We've deployed it widely. You don't hear a lot about it, and it enables us not to really back out, but to really push further in, because now we can have a digital tether to everybody that we work with all the time, as opposed to really only seeing them when we're face to face. So we've added that to our tool belt. We haven't really backed away from anybody in the process. We've just we've gotten closer to them, if that makes sense.
Awesome. No, thank you, Eric. So I have a few questions here. Artie, I'm going to toss this first one over to you. Your talk focused on what DARPA and government personnel are doing to promote tech transition. Is there something industry and academia can do to help get our innovations adopted by military? Given that you're the only panel member in industry right now, do you mind addressing that question?
No, absolutely. So that's actually a great question, and I think part of what we need to be doing better of is somewhere along the way, over the last 20 years, we've kind of lost that understanding that it is a defense industrial complex. It's not just the government, it's not just industry, it's not just academia. It truly is one defense industrial complex that works together. What I've seen over my government career and now in industry is somewhere along the way we've lost that close communication with our partners. There's this overburdening fear of ever doing anything that is not contractually allowed, or I can't have a conversation with the contract officers here or the lawyers here. And we're so afraid to truly sit down and talk about what needs to be done that I think we miss a lot of things. So what I actually tell my team is look, first off, the government's not always right. If there's better ways to do things, bring that up with your customers. They may push back, and you have the conversation at the point, the customer will always be right at the end of the day, but don't be afraid to have those conversations, because when we all realize that, I'm not the smartest person sitting in the room, Chubber's not the smartest person sitting in the room, it's a collective group here trying to figure out the process and how we move forward. So one of the things I really encourage the industry folks to do is have honest dialogue with your customers. Sit down and talk about how things are going, what are ways we can do things better. Truly embrace it as a team. You're not just there executing that I've been told to do tasks 1 through 10, so I'm going to do tasks 1 through 10. There are ways that sometimes you figure out a better way to do it. So I think that open dialogue is important. The second thing I will do is I also push the team, and it was actually one of the first briefs my team was giving when I came out to industry. And the 2-star sitting across from the table of us asked us how the kill chain closes on that technology. And my program manager said, I don't know, the government's working that. And he and I had a nice long conversation after that meeting. So my point there is we need to think about the system as a whole. Especially from what we do, it's weapon systems. So just because we're working certain tech doesn't mean we don't need to understand the whole system. So the other recommendation I have for industry is, even though that might not be your swim lane, at least try to understand how you fit, where you fit, and how it plays into the big picture. Because that's really going to be the conversation at the end of the day. The title of this session is capability, right? We don't deliver tech, we deliver capability. And when you understand how that fits into that capability, that's where those good conversations happen.
Awesome, thank you, Artie.
Yeah.
This is for you, Eric, and let me ask the question, I'll do a little setup and then get your response. The majority of our service members are ignorant of how capabilities are fielded or the importance of supporting S&T experimentation. Do you believe that educating them on acquisitions earlier in their careers would have a positive impact on the capability development process? And Eric, coincidentally, was part of the DARPA Service Chief Fellow Program, where we bring in once a quarter about a dozen or so officers to address this very question, to get them exposed to DARPA technologies, understanding how technology is developed and ultimately fielded. And so, Eric, you were part of that program. Can you answer the question on how being a fellow impacted your understanding, and then just your ability to be more effective as a commander in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I do think education earlier in the process. It's really about the right people, though, right? And that's what the Service Chief Fellow Program gets exactly right, is they recruit people. They're screened, they're vetted, and you got people there that can go back out into the force and, be your feelers and your liaisons and connect back to DARPA, ideally. So I think the education piece is critical. I don't think standardizing anytime you standardize or traditionalize something, then it just, takes the wind out of it usually. But, and then just closing the gaps, the same thing, the point we're making about industry down with Larezo, just bringing people in at every step of the way. There still are a bunch of, S&T people inside the different commands, but closing, a lot of them actually act as, some folks in the room who've dealt with them may have seen this, but they end up being gatekeepers for the force. So a lot of things don't actually get down to the force, and they stop at the S&T guy because he represents all requirements, right? But, well, we don't have a requirement for a time machine. Well, we do if we have one, I'll tell you that. Right? Like, or a hoverboard or something, you know what I mean? Well, might not have wrote the requirement. When I see that thing, I'm going to want it. So I'll write it right now, right? So, you know, you got to break through those people and get down to the end users, and that's got to become part of our, you know, part of our process, if you will. Because you just won't get the results without it. And I think, you know, where we started in Iraq that got us there was we started with, you know, Iraqis going out on a mission, calling us on cell phones, and then coming back all beat up because we knew they were in contact. And then by the time I left, you know, a couple months later with duct tape and op fund, just operational funds we had on the ground, we had cobbled together a system where Iraqis 200 miles away that were being remotely advised by Australians who were under an Army Special Forces team, who were under a Navy SEAL Special Operations Command, who were supported by the French, were dropping bombs from a French Mirage on a target 200 meters from our Iraqis, and then doing reattacks in like 3 minutes. That was just unachievable without that, but that was because everybody was involved in the process. To include the industry guys that came out to us, the researchers that helped us, and you just can't get results without doing that. So education is part, but just involving everybody in the system is critical.
Okay, thank you. The red light's flashing, so we're over time, but can we give our panelists a round of applause?